Cooper Flagg headlines the nation's #1 recruiting class, but are he and his teammates enough to make the Blue Devils national title contenders?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This fine fella to my side is Mr. Andy Patton, and I am Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We want to thank you for making us your first listen or watch, and remind you, every single episode you can find ad-free on Amazon Music. We want to extend a special shout out to all the everydayers joining us and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. Andy, we got some great mailbag questions earlier on Thursday. I don't know if you saw those, but man, I'm excited to tackle those sometime soon. Folks, the link for that's in the show notes. Come and join us. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? You know it's game time. All right, Andy, we are so close to the season that it means it's time for our conference previews, and that makes me so stinking excited. I love this time of year. It's great. So, as of now till the season, we have 9 conference previews. We're going to do one each week, unless there's like wild news and it forces us to change our schedule, whatever. We'll adjust to that as needed. But we're kicking things off little alphabetically. Give us some ACC action this week, Andy. Thought we'd start with one of the Power 5, no longer Power 6. Let's pour one out for the Pac-12. And Andy, just skating by, one of the things you might think of as the massive storyline. There are 3 new schools coming in: Stanford, Cal, and SMU, 2 of whom have brand new coaches. Andy Enfield at SMU replacing Rob Lanier, that whole coaching cycle. And then Kyle Smith in at Stanford replacing Jared Haas. And then also in probably the biggest coaching change that everyone's aware of, Kenny Payne mercifully for him out the door at Louisville. He rejoins Coach Cal, and they're at Arkansas together. Pat Kelsey comes over from Charleston, bringing some great energy, hopefully reigniting this Louisville program. But Andy, we continue to search for who this ACC conference is. They have not, for a couple years now, been at the tip top of the sport like they were for so long. And we even searched to decide, can this conference produce champions? I think chiefly we're looking at Duke and North Carolina, of whom Torvik has Duke 2nd, Carolina 6th. But the thing is, no other team in this conference right now in the top 25 at Torvik. Andy, what do you make of these 2 teams and maybe the ACC's identity at large?
Yeah, I think the ACC has long kind of had the stranglehold on college basketball, and thanks mostly to the performances of Duke and North Carolina. Obviously, that's not to discredit Virginia, who's won national championships, Louisville, who's had a lot of success, like Syracuse has had success. A lot of that came, when they were in the Big East, but they've had success. Even Miami recently has had success as well. So it's not just Duke and Carolina, but right now the conference is in an odd spot for a litany of reasons. We're not going to dive all the way into everything going on with Florida State and Clemson and litigation.
It'd help Florida State if they'd win a football game, honestly.
Right. Yeah, Florida State and Clemson, the 2 teams suing the ACC, combined 0-3 on the football field right now. But the ACC is in kind of a unique spot. And I think, because we saw what happened to the Pac-12, there is some angst. There is some concern. The ACC is far more protected than the Pac-12 was, just in terms of the way that their contracts are written. But obviously they're being challenged. And that's something that is going to, I think it's the reason that, and we didn't dig into this today, we'll talk about it more, but the talks between the UConn and the Big 12 have stalled right now. And I think a lot of the reason that realignment is frozen is people are kind of waiting to see what's going to happen to the ACC. And while the future realignment conversations is certainly something we will get into as things come up, right now, I think the conversation for this conference is just, they're supposed to be this great basketball conference, and the football is okay right now, but it's been a pretty rough start to the season. So is the basketball going to tick up? Are we going to see them back, putting 6, 7, 8 teams in the NCAA tournament, sending multiple teams to the Final Four, things like that? Obviously, last year we saw both Clemson and NC State go on these huge runs, but neither of those teams were like big powerhouses throughout the regular season. The teams that were, Duke and North Carolina, didn't make it as far as people hoped they would. Duke had a solid run in the tournament, but it's an interesting spot. And I think you look at this conference right now, and like you said, there's 2 teams that everybody's going to have in their top 10. It's the 2 teams everybody expects, Duke, North Carolina. They're going to be in the top 10. In a lot of places, they're going to be in the top 5, and that's deserved. We haven't done our rankings yet, but I guarantee you those 2 teams will be in the top 10.
Yep.
But outside of that, like you said, Torbeck has Miami 26th. I'm not even sure that I see another ACC team that would be in my top 30 at this point. Again, haven't made the full list, but there's a fairly steep drop off for me in terms of kind of, maybe Virginia ticks back up. Maybe Miami has a resurgence from last year's debacle. Maybe Clemson stays great even after losing PJ Hall. But there's some kind of concern. And I think there's a lot of pressure on those 2 teams, the Blue Devils and the Tar Heels, to kind of carry this conference. And frankly, I think both teams might be up to the task, though, because these 2 teams are going to be really, really good this year. And if you told me the national champion in 2025 came out of the ACC, I would not be shocked, although I would be incredibly shocked if it wasn't one of these 2 programs.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Andy, I think it would be a fun exercise if we talked about why each of these 2 teams could win and why they won't. And it's funny, I think it centers around probably the 2 players that will lead the charge for ACC Player of the Year. One who is 17 and one who is like 85 in RJ Davis, returning for his 5th year. So, Andy, let's look at the Duke pro and con of it, of why they could win the national championship. Let me just start by saying, obviously with Duke, there is this high-end talent with not only Cooper Flagg, but you look at Kaman Muluach is going to be the anchor in the middle, kind of thinking back to Derek Lively 2 years ago in his freshman year. Con Knipple, by all accounts, is just shooting the lights out at practice, and plenty of others. And then it seems to me, Andy, like Coach Shire has done a great job of surrounding this young talent with, I don't want to mitigate these players, but I'll call them peripheral players around these guys that have the experience to help solidify and hopefully point the way for these young guys. And so I think there is a lot of potential with that. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I really, we talked about it a few times on the show already, and I'm sure when we do a full Duke preview, we'll talk about it again. But I really like what John Shire did this offseason. I think this roster has a nice combination of incredibly high-end talent. The most important thing you can do when trying to win a national championship is put good players on your roster. It's very obvious, but it is true. And Duke, check. That is done. They have an immense amount of talent at every position on this roster. But I do also like the combination of young talent, of returning talent, and of like new talent coming in that can fill kind of some of those roles that they need, like a Mason Gillis coming in, a guy who's been at the national championship level, who has filled a valuable role in his career at Purdue. You get a Malik Brown in, you get a Zion James in. Like, those are guys who I think fit really valuable roles for this team. You get Tyrese Proctor back. Like, I think that the combination of returners, newcomers, veterans really is going to mix well. I would say, though, that if kind of on the flip side of that one of the cons for Duke is there is a lack of continuity on this roster. Like, they didn't bring in a ton of transfers, but because they have 5 incoming freshmen,
six
incoming freshmen, they haven't got a lot of opportunity to play together. Duke challenged themselves in the non-conference. They're going to be a trial by fire situation for them with a lot of really good games on the schedule. And I think that's going to help them be better when March rolls around. But I would offer that as one of my few kind of like, if things don't go according to plan for Duke, if they don't win at all, or they don't make the Final Four, to me, continuity and lack of playing together could be something that kind of presents an issue. The backcourt is good, but is it good enough to win a title? I think there are fair questions about that as well. A lot is going to reside on how Cooper Flagg does, which he's going to do great, but how much can he carry this team is a big question coming into the year.
Yeah. Ego management and management of the depth will certainly be a thing of like, Are these freshmen coming in to sit? Are they coming in to play? And if they're coming in to play, do the veterans around them understand that the freshmen are, there's just,
right.
I think Coach Shire, who is a very wise and good coach, even though he's a young coach, I think he can manage and handle that. But it is something, obviously, to keep an eye on. Cooper Flagg, who won't turn 18 till December 21st, in an era of get old, stay old. We've still got a bunch of fifth-year seniors using COVID eligibility. Yesterday on the show, Leaf and I looked at Alabama, who could start 5 fifth-year players this year, Andy.
Crazy.
Can Cooper Flagg and his young talent and the young talent around him win out over that more experience? That's just a storyline for this year.
Looking at North Carolina too, I mean, I think this is way too of a simple breakdown, but effectively the pros for Carolina is the backcourt and the cons is the front court. Like, it's not quite that simplistic, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about Carolina. Obviously a program you're incredibly plugged into, but I look at Davis and Cadeau as one of the best backcourt tandems in terms of having a facilitator, distributor, and a score first guard. And you got some young freshmen coming in who could be excellent in Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. You got Cade Tyson coming in who could maybe play the 4, but is probably more of a 3, who's a fantastic outside shooter. And the front court, they make some additions. They got a late addition into Jean-Claude. They bring in Van Allen Lubin. They got some guys going to step into some bigger roles who were kind of reserved behind Baycott. But I don't love this front court for Carolina. They had their eyes set on some other bigger fish that they weren't able to land in the transfer portal. And I think, to me, Carolina's ceiling is not going to be determined by Davis and Cadeau and those guys. It's going to be determined by what Hubert Davis does with this front court and how he manages to make things work, whether he plays smaller, whether he, how they make adjustments, because they don't have an Armando Baycott on this roster, and they don't even have a Harrison Ingram type on this roster.
Yeah, and I think that's it, Andy, is how do you mitigate that? Like, can the backcourt be talented enough that the front court just at least holds their own? I think Carolina is going to need a massive leap from Jalen Washington, who we project to start at the 5. And I think from Elliot Cadeau's scoring output as well to match up with his playmaking. That was part of their Sweet 16 loss to Alabama last year. Nate Oates had his defenders back off of Cadeau. He sat the last several minutes on the bench, and then you don't have your playmaker. And so we'll watch all that. But like you said, both of these teams, you could see them cutting down the nets on the first Monday in April, but there are, as with all college basketball teams, some potential pitfalls.
Well, Isaac, you mentioned it already. RJ Davis, Cooper Flagg, feels like they're pretty much locks to be on the All-ACC team, but who's going to join them? Who are some other players who could be in that conversation? We're going to discuss that and some award predictions coming up in just a second. First, folks, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. LinkedIn is not just another generic job board. They help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those that aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, folks, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that over 2.5 million small businesses who use LinkedIn, they're all wearing so many hats that they may not have the time or the resources to focus on hiring. And so they're constantly finding ways to make that process even easier. That includes launching a feature that helps you write job descriptions. So folks, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Isaac, moving on here on our ACC preview. We talked big storylines. We talked a little bit on the coaching changes, but we mostly focused on the identity of the conference and the projections for Duke and North Carolina, the two teams projected a lot higher in the ACC than the rest of the teams in the conference. But what we want to do now is take a look at some predictions for our all-conference teams, as well as player of the year, transfer of the year, freshman of the year, defensive player of the year, and coach of the year, taking a look at how we think those things might play out in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Isaac, why don't you start us off by talking about your All-ACC first team. And as a reminder, folks, or for those of you who are new, welcome to the show. If you are somebody who listens to these conference previews last year, we try to make our first team projections be players from different teams. So we each picked 5 players, but none of those 5 players are on the same team. As tempting as it might be to pick, both RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau, for example, or Cooper Flagg and Tyrese Proctor, we wanted to make sure we represented 5 different teams. So Isaac, why don't you let us know who you have on your ACC first team here in the preseason?
Well, you just named 2 of mine, Andy, and I think they're probably the most no-brainer of this. The ACC returns its player of the year from last year, so I feel like you got to go there. Give me RJ Davis on this team. Cooper Flagg also feels very no-brainery to me. I know, and it's hard to pick a guy that hasn't played a single game in college basketball, but good grief, it seems very, very legit what he's able to do. My next 2 guys are guys that very, very easily could have stayed in the NBA draft last year, but decided to come back, and both the ACC and college basketball at large are better for it, and that's Hunter Salas at Wake Forest. I mean, I just think he's going to have an absolute year. Could honestly, gosh, how often have we talked about Wake and what Steve Forbes does with their guards? He's a guy that I could very see jumping up and supplanting RJ Davis for ACC Player of the Year. My next guy, and let me just say it's Jameer Watkins at Florida State, which was somebody that, there was in the transfer portal, decided to not only come back to college, but almost seemingly come back to Florida State, who's not going to be a good team, unfortunately. And that's why I would see him maybe getting left off this list, is because he's going to be phenomenal, but FSU's not going to be good, so maybe not. And then my final choice is JJ Starling at Syracuse. Will be a junior. He came over to Syracuse from Notre Dame last year. Scored 13 a game for the Orange and Red Autry's first year. Oh, by the way, on a team that had Judah Mintz on it, who scored 19 a game, high usage rate. And so somebody's got to take all of that usage and scoring. And I think JJ Starling is the big recipient of that and steps up in a big way. So give me Davis, Flagg, Salas, Watkins, and Starling. Andy, what about you?
I really like that Starling pick. And it's one of the very few that is different from my list. We have 3 of the same, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on RJ Davis or Cooper Flagg or Hunter Salas, because we picked all 3 of those guys, and I think for very good reason there. My 2 other picks, and I think this should be clear, but just to clarify, we're also not picking teams based on like an actual 5-man roster construction, which is good for me because I have Flagg and then 4 guards, mostly small guards on this roster. So again, Davis, Flagg, Salas. Then my 2 differences, I have Marcus Burton, who was excellent last year at Notre Dame. Somewhat similar to the Watkins conversation of a guy who I think Notre Dame's going to be better. I think they're going to continue to grow under Micah Shrewsbury, but I don't think they're going to be a super significant player in the ACC just yet. But if Burton puts up numbers similar to what he did last year, he has to be in this conversation. And then I'm going with Nigel Pack for my last pick here. This Miami team has had a lot of roster turnover. I think they're going to be better this year, even having lost Norchad O'Meara and Wooga Poplar. I think for them, Jaleel Bethia is an interesting freshman coming in, and Pack's going to be kind of the straw that stirs the drink for them. And I think Coach L's team is going to be better, and I think Pack's going to be a big reason for that. So 3 of the same here for us, and some fun picks there that could end up in that roster as well.
That Burton Shrewsbury backcourt at Notre Dame could that's an interesting sophomore duo for me. Andy, ACC Player of the Year. I'm guessing we both probably either went Flagg or Davis with this. Is that true? And which way did you go?
Yeah, I went Davis. To me, it's you have to do something pretty incredible to knock him off. Obviously, he has to put up similar numbers to what he did last year. There's little reason to believe that he won't do that. He doesn't have somebody taking touches in the front court from him. So I think that actually might even unleash him a little bit more. So for me, unless Flagg goes absolutely nuclear, which let's be clear, could happen, I think this is Davis's award to lose.
I think so too. I mean, maybe his usage goes down with the emergence of Ian Jackson. I don't see it. And so I think unless there's just like extreme voter fatigue, which is a thing, I'm with you. And but that, there's another place for Cooper Flagg on our list. Now, folks, I know some award prediction people now just do newcomer of the year, so it encompasses freshmen and transfers together. Not here on Locked On College Basketball, baby. We want to have a transfer of the year and a freshman of the year. So, Andy, let's go transfer of the year next. Who are you going with?
I'm going with Terrence Edwards, transferred to Louisville, one of many great transfers joining Pat Kelsey's team. There's a lot of options. throughout the conference. There's a lot of options just at Louisville. I thought about Chucky Hepburn from Wisconsin, but Edwards is a guy who averaged like 17 a game at James Madison last year. He's a really talented, versatile two-way guy. I think Pat Kelsey is going to absolutely let him go haywire, and I wouldn't be surprised if he, even on a team with a lot more talent than Louisville had in the past and that James Madison had last year, I still think Edwards is going to do a bunch of great stuff, and I think he's going to put up the kind of numbers necessary to take home this award.
Man, I love it. I love it. I love it. My pick is Andre Stojakovic, who decided, hey, I want to transfer schools, but I want to stay in the ACC, and I don't want to leave no Cal. So he transfers from Stanford to Cal. And look, it might be another case of great player on a bad team doesn't get picked, but I think he's going to have a great year for Cal and Coach Madsen there. So we'll see what happens with that. But I like Stojakovic, but man, I'm with you on the Edwards pick. I really like that as well. Andy, freshman of the year, I think is maybe the no-braineriest of our entire conversation today. So on 3, 1, 2, 3, Cooper Flagg. Yeah. In fact, we joked, folks, before the show, we need to have freshman of the year non-Cooper Flagg edition. And that would actually be a very entertaining conversation, because there's a lot of great options beyond Flagg on his own team and around the league. Like Andy mentioned, Jalil Bethea at Miami, and we've got a bunch of others too. So that's a conversation for another day. Andy, let's go to Depoy, Defensive Player of the Year. Reese Beekman and Ryan Dunn are both gone from Virginia, so we can't pick Beekman anymore. Who are you going with?
Yeah, I'm going with Jalen Warley, transferring to Virginia from Florida State. Yes, it was absolutely me looking at Virginia's roster and being like, okay, who on this team? And Warley put up good rate defensive stats at Florida State. He's a bigger guard. I think he's going to be able to make an impact. And yeah, Virginia doesn't have Beekman. They don't have Ryan Dunn. They're going to need guys to step up and play, that role in that pesky defense for Tony Bennett. So I didn't see an obvious rim protector, which is usually kind of the choice here. I know that you're going with a rim protector. I'm hesitant about freshmen, not trying to give away your pick here, but I wanted to go with Warley because I think that Virginia guards have a good opportunity to take home this award, and I think he's got the talent to do it.
I think it's in Tony Bennett's contract that each year the ACC Depoy has to be one of his players, and so that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, Andy, to your foreshadowing, I am going with Duke freshman Kaman Maluach, who last year Duke really suffered. I think this was their Achilles heel, was not having a true five and Flip playing a little bit out of position there. But you think back to Derek Lively when he was healthy and on 2 years ago, absolutely was a stud. Let's be honest, the voters for these awards love counting stats, blocks and steals. I think Maluach is just going to rack up a bunch of blocks this year. And so the voters, I think, will go with him. And I think it's going to be a very defensible option for them. Andy, last of our superlatives today, ACC Coach of the Year. Who are you choosing?
Give me Steve Forbes. Look, if Wake Forest finally breaks through and gets themselves into the NCAA tournament, they've been in that first 4 out conversation for multiple years. If this is the year where they finally do it, after losing key pieces, I know they get Hunter Salas back, but Andrew Carr's out the door. They lost Kevin Boopy Miller, transferred. Like they're a little bit shorter on some of that. They got some other guys coming in. Tyler Johnson's a nice addition for them. Yes. But Omaha Biliu is another one coming over from Iowa State. So maybe some of those guys will pop a little bit. Salas, I think, is good enough to help get this team into the NCAA tournament. If they finish 3rd, 4th, 5th in the ACC, which feels possible to me if they get an automatic bid, or excuse me, an at-large bid into the NCAA tournament, I think Steve Forbes gets this award and would have earned it in that case.
Omaha Biliu is definitely a candidate for sophomore breakout. Did not do it at Iowa State last year. Also losing the shooting of Damari Monsanto. That's a tough loss for them. Andy, I'm going with Louisville's Pat Kelsey. One of the things we always joke about is Coach of the Year awards go to people at teams who aren't expected to do much and do at least a middling amount beyond that. But I think for Louisville, it's less about what they're expected to do this year and what they've done the past 2 years and what I think Pat Kelsey is going to be able to do. I know it's like a wholly brand new roster, but I think there's a lot of great pieces. I love the energy he and the staff are bringing. And as we always say, college basketball is better when Louisville's good. And so I think he's going to get a lot of head nods for that in his first year of the conference. Andy, it's fun getting back into superlatives, man. I love it. Now, we got to tier these teams up, not like cry over them, but what are the tiers in which we would rank this? How many teams from the ACC are going dancing in 2025 when we do still have 68 teams? Oh, by the way, and will any of last year's dubious and notorious snubs, I shouldn't say dubious, that makes it sound like they weren't deserving. They should have been in, like Pitt. Will they make their way in? We'll get to that in just a second. Right after I tell you about Gametime. Going to live events, y'all, it's the absolute best. Just even reading that line puts me in COVID mind frame and I'm freaked out. But man, what a joy is it to get to go to music and theater and comedy. And finally, college sports are back. It's week 2 of college football right now. Our great sport is like 8 weeks away, and we're looking forward to making all new memories this college sports season. And great news, when you're getting tickets for this year, Gametime has this new feature. It's called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through all those thousands of other tickets. So whether it's Gametime ticket coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat, I was actually checking that out today. It's a really neat feature. Yeah. Gametime has got you covered. We're just talking Louisville. They take on Morehead State on November 4th, opening day in Pat Kelsey's first home game. Andy, tickets in the lower level for that, $63, with even cheaper tickets available higher up for $36 in section 316. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That could get you into the door for that game for $16, Andy. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Andy, we're going to get into some predictions of who all is going to make the NCAA tournament out of the ACC. Will Carolina or Duke be able to bring this whole thing home? But first, we want to talk about some tiers. We always like to try to break these teams up. It's difficult to rank straight up, but putting them into tiers is a little more helpful endeavor. It's fantasy football season, so I think a lot of people think in tiers right now of when they're doing their drafts. So Andy, you actually put together our tiers, so I'm going to let you take this away.
Yeah, the easiest place to start was tier 1, Duke, North Carolina. That's it. That is your first tier. I think they are kind of a cut above the rest of the teams in the conference right now. I do think there are some teams that could kind of rise up and challenge them a little bit. Tier 2 kind of makes up the group of teams that maybe sneak into that top 3, top 2 conversation. That would be Wake Forest, Miami, Pitt, and Clemson. I like it. I think all of them have the rosters, the coaching to kind of potentially push their way into that conversation. If I had to pick, I think Miami is probably the most likely. I know currently they're the 3rd place team at Torvik's preseason rankings. I wouldn't be surprised if when Ken Pom and other stuff come out with updated rankings that they're kind of in that third spot for this conference. But Wake Forest is in that conversation as well. I think they could I don't think either of these teams are going to pass Duke and North Carolina. It's more of could they be the clear-cut 3rd team? Because to me, Wake Forest, Miami, Pitt, Clemson, 3 through 7. Again, this is why I like doing tiers, like you said, is I'm not ranking them 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm saying they're all kind of bunched in that group, and I could see these teams finishing, up as high as 3 and as low as 7. I think they're kind of all in that conversation. Kind of depends a lot on some of the new rosters for those teams.
Yeah, I would last year I would have put Pitt up there with it, but they lose a lot with Bub Carrington and amongst others leaving. I'm with you. I'm really curious. I like your Wake Forest conversation earlier. I'm curious to see what they're going to be. Can Miami have a bounce back? We saw so much from Clemson last year, but can they overcome losing PJ Hall and Joe Girard? I mean, those guys were so backbony for that team. So it's going to be interesting to see who does jump up with that.
Tier 3, this is kind of one of my favorite tiers because I could see an argument for all of these 4 teams making the NCAA tournament. I don't think all 4 will, but I could see each of them has if things go right, they could make it. And that would be NC State, Virginia, Louisville, and Syracuse. They all come in at tier 3. Tier 4 is kind of a bit more question marks. You got Georgia Tech, SMU, the first newcomer on the list, Notre Dame, and Cal. And then tier 5, kind of your bottom feeders, or at least expected bottom feeders. That would be Virginia Tech, Boston College, and then another newcomer, Stanford. I think Kyle Smith's a phenomenal coach, but I think it's going to take more than 1 year to turn things around for the Cardinal, especially having to adjust to what's going to be an insane schedule for them, travel-wise, for them and Cal, frankly, as the West Coast members of the ACC.
Yeah. Andy, as I look at, there's always the quibbles of like, I could go up or down one tier on a couple teams.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody though that I would move more than one tier from what you've done. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think I would probably put Cal in tier 5, but it's like, whatever, tier 4, tier 5. So I think you, my friend, have done a bang up job in your first tier work of this off-season conference preview stuff. So, here's what I'm really interested in. We talked about those tier 2 teams jumping up. I'm really like that grouping of NC State, Virginia, Louisville, Syracuse in tier 3 is real. As you said, I'm really curious about that. Like, could Louisville, it's just so unknown. Could they jump up to be that team 3? Can NC State ride that energy from last year's? There's so much wild, like Virginia hanging out in tier 3. Like, can Tony Bennett do it? Man, it's going to be fun to see.
I think Louisville's a team I could argue. I'd be willing to say they could be as high as 3 and as low as like 11 or 12. Like and it's easy to say that about a team that has an entirely new roster and a new coach, because of course, like, it's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. But part of that is Louisville having a new coach and a new system and a new roster. Part of that is that a lot of the other teams in the ACC are a little bit hard to pin down right now. So I don't project Louisville to be an NCAA tournament team in Pat Kelsey's first year. I do have 5 teams from the ACC that I do have in the big dance. Louisville is a team that I think could do it. Like I said, everybody in that 3rd tier, I could see Virginia making it back. I could see Syracuse sneaking in. I could see NC State. But for me, the 5 that I officially do have in the field of 68 right now is Duke and Carolina, of course, Wake Forest, Miami, and then Clemson getting back into the dance. That means that I'm leaving Pitt out again. I'm sure those Panthers fans are going to be real frustrated if they find themselves on the wrong side of the bubble for another year.
No, I mean, as we said, like losing Bub Carrington, losing Blake Hinson, good grief. And Fed, my guy Fed, man, he's out the door. And so I could see it, but I think Jalen Lowe is going to take a huge leap this year. And so I actually have that same 5 as you, plus Pitt making it in. It's going to be intriguing to see this identity of the ACC. Andy, end of the day, we started this conversation with talking about Duke and North Carolina as potential national champions. A, do you see it, the ACC regular season ending with one of those 2 teams on top of the heap? And B, do you see us finishing the year? I'll just even say like Final 4. Is that, do you see one or both? Not both of these. Well, I say not both of these teams. We had it a couple years ago, but can one of these teams make it to Final 4?
I think, yes. I think the ACC will have a team in the Final 4 next year, but I do not think the ACC will have a national champion next year. I think both these teams could do it. Like I said, worried about North Carolina's front court. Duke, I think, has the right recipe, but there's still outside shooting. They got some freshmen who are going to be good, but the rest of the team, I'm a little concerned in that area. There's a few other things where I'm like, nobody's roster is perfect, but with Kansas and Bama and with Gonzaga and Houston and some of the other teams that are going to be in it's going to be hard. Like if you're asking me ACC or the field, I'm taking the field. But I do think that at least one of these teams will be in the Final 4, and it wouldn't shock me if both these teams are in the Elite 8, just because of how dang talented these 2 rosters are.
And I don't, back in the conference side of it, somebody else could win the ACC tournament because that's, anybody's game. But I don't see anybody, like one of these 2 teams will be your ACC regular season champion. Book it, stamp it, put a bookmark on it, and get cold takes out when obviously I'm inevitably wrong.
Well, on that note, that is going to wrap it up for our first of what is going to be 9 full episode conference previews. We're going to talk about the other conferences as well. We don't want to ignore them, but they're going to be spaced out in different ways throughout the next couple of months as we get prepared for the season. We are going to continue doing team previews as well. We did 3 of them this last week, Kansas, Gonzaga, and Alabama. We got more of those coming your way next week and in subsequent weeks as well, but that is going to wrap it up for today and for this week. So as always, apologies to the lawyer family and teammate Mason Gillis, now over at Duke. Let's go Wildcats, and until Monday, peace.